Fitz, will you open your hymnal to page 542? Read the first stanza of the poem you find there.
To the virgins to make much of time?
Yes, that's the one. Somewhat appropriate, isn't it?
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Old time is still a-flying. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying.
Thank you, Mr. Fitz. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is Carpe Diem. Now, who knows what that means?
Carpe Diem. That's seize the day.
Very good, Mr.
Meeks.
Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thank you for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die.
We're getting towards the end of May, and I've come out to my usual dog walking spot, this time without the dog. So I just look like a nutcase hanging around with this microphone. The lovely spring weather we had with the warm sunshine and everything has kind of abated, and as my luck would seem to have it, it's now raining. Strangely though, the rain's not actually doing my mood, any sort of bad service right now. I feel kind of relaxed in this rain. It feels quite fitting. Can still hear some birds singing over there. Don't ask me what they are. Anybody who's good with that kind of stuff, feel free to email me. This is going to be a strange episode because it's about a poem that I really like, but also I'm reciting it and talking about it at a time where I'm maybe not in the best place. So I hope that I do it justice. What you just heard at the beginning there is probably a lot of people's first introduction to this poem, which was from the 1989 movie Dead Poets Society with that man Robin Williams. Before I go any further and talk about the poem and the poet, I just want to say that I rewatched Dead Poets for the first time in a long time the other night. And I expected it to not hold up so well. I expected it to feel cheesy and rubbish and a bit sort of its time. And in many ways, you could say it is a little bit cheesy and it is a little bit sort of hokey. But I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it a lot more now than I did back then. I mean, this film came out when I was 1. So I didn't actually watch it until a bit later on in life. Certainly when I was at university, I think. And at the time, I sort of derided it as being a bit silly and all this. But I do think it had an effect on me and my desire to become a teacher. I think it's very seductive about how much impact you can have on a room full of people, especially when you're discussing something as powerful as poetry. So really, Robin Williams, I blame you bugger, for putting me in the situation I'm in. But I'll give you a very brief life update for how things are going since we last talked. So, the building, the hospital, thankfully I haven't had to see the inside of it again for quite some time. My wife is making a slow but steady recovery. But dealing with an 18-month-old and someone who can't put all their weight on their foot at the moment, combine that with some, tricky sort of mental health moments, really, brought on by lack of sleep and just general exhaustion, I am maybe at my most tired that I've been for a long time, maybe since before Rosie was a really little baby. And she's an absolute dream and she's wonderful, but sometimes getting her down to sleep solo and then having to come downstairs and do all the dinner solo and then having to make sure that I'm the one available in case something happens with my wife solo. It's just left me with very little bandwidth to do anything else. Which is why today, as my mother-in-law has her for the day, I've decided to come out and record this episode because I felt like I needed to. The way I've selected poems in the past has been a bit more organic. I've waited until a poem's been in my head for some time. And this one just has. This one's been in my mind for some time now. I'm going through a bit as well with grief. We're coming up to the 3-year anniversary of my father's death, and I'm finding that really hard. And I didn't expect to feel emotional today, but it's kind of come out of nowhere, really. On the plus side, I'm doing well with some other projects that aren't to do with this podcast. My singing has taken off, which is really good. I've started getting some paid gigs now, which is lovely. And yeah, I'm enjoying having that creative outlet. Although, obviously, I've only got so much time, and so I don't want to leave the podcast to wither on the vine. I wanted to make sure I was keeping it going. So, if you're wondering why my voice might sound a little bit more gravelly, it's because I've probably pushed it a little bit over the past few days with singing some Frank Sinatra and Rat Pack numbers to crowds of drunk people. But hey, that's good fun. I've been seeing quite a lot recently of my garden. Not been able to go too many places. And when we first moved in 3 years ago, we planted a very big rose bush, which immediately seemed to die. And I thought that was it. It was done. They were, I forget the type, but they are big orange roses, very, very beautiful, and kind of different too. We place it at the bottom of the garden, which gets quite a bit of sun. And yeah, in the first year, I mean, we had a lot going on, obviously, and I neglected the watering of them and neglected the feeding of them a bit, and they died pretty quick. And I thought that, well, that was it. Maybe an expensive mistake. But then the year after, they sort of went again, and were a little bit bigger this time. Again, didn't really follow through and keeping up with the maintenance. Last year was a blur, but I do remember that we'd sort of tied them back by this point, and they'd started to climb a little bit more. And this year they've come into absolute beautiful bloom. They are popping at the bottom of the garden right now. And when I was leaving the house earlier on, I did really properly stop and sniff them and have a look at all of the rosebuds coming through. It looks very, very healthy. So there's proof there that neglecting something for a few years and just hoping for the best can sometimes work wonders. Much like my career. To the virgins, to make much of time. Gather your rosebuds while you may. Old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best, which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent, the worse and worst, times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while you may, go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. Robert Herrick, born in 1591, someone who I had never really heard of, and I shamefully admit that the first time I ever heard this poem was through Dead Poets Society. And it's funny, really, because I think that this is a good example of how a really good poem can stand the test of time, but also, a bit like I was discussing before with some of Blake's poetry, it's quite easy for people to forget it, and it to be then picked up later on by people further down the line and go, you know what, this was pretty good actually. Why don't we give this a dusting off and play it again? And that seems to definitely be the case for Mr. Herrick. Largely forgotten in his own lifetime, really, and certainly in the sort of 18th century, but then was picked up again. And by about 1901, had been revised and replenished, if you like. The concept of gather your rosebuds while you may. It's an incredible first line, and I want to talk about that first, because for me, the concept of Carpe Diem, which obviously centres massively around this poem, links quite closely with the Memento Mori, remember that you must die. And it's an interesting time for me to talk about both concepts, because right now I'm not feeling particularly great about either. I think having started a family of my own has made me think a lot more about my own mortality. I don't think that's that unusual. But it's also made me think more about, what am I doing? Where are my rosebuds? Obviously I'm very lucky I have a gorgeous little rosebud of a daughter. Not so little anymore. But those feelings about, trying to capture those moments, and I think about, is that what the rosebuds are? Are they these little moments of our life that we should try to enjoy fully in the moment and not waste it worrying about other things? And I fully subscribe to that idea. It's just very hard to do. It's very hard to do well, at least. I think most people, if you gave them the opportunity to talk about their worries, you'd find that they were largely worries about things that might happen in the future but might not. And they might be to do with worries about, the state of the world or the state of themselves, or failures that they feel that they are perpetuating. I know that, obviously for me with the Huntingtons, the concept of Carpe Diem should really ring very, very true to me. Unlike a lot of people, I kind of know what's more than likely going to get me. Unless I get hit by a bus, but It's really hard, because I feel like what Herrick describes perfectly there is that, like all people giving out advice, he suffers from the same problem of wanting to do more of the gathering, and that image is a pastoral sense, gathering the rosebuds. It doesn't say pick them, it doesn't say smell them, it doesn't say savour them. It's gather them, almost like someone hoarding and holding and keeping them in a place. And I remember when I first heard the phrase from someone saying that they would treasure my kind words. And I thought it odd that they would use that phrase, treasure, to think, you're going to put them in a box somewhere and, keep them. That is kind of what we do. It's what we should do. Because there's enough horrible rubbish going on. There's enough sadness and stuff that makes you feel sad and crap and upset. So why not treasure them? And yet, of course, gathering the rosebuds, we all know that these things die. They don't last. You can't keep them forever. You could press them. You could keep a facsimile of a rose, but you can't keep it forever. The same as you can't keep a person forever. You can't keep a memory forever. But you can try. Old time is still a-flying. I think that seems to be a constant theme of all poetry and all art, is the concept of time waits for no man. We are in a race against the clock every year. Even looking at those roses in my garden earlier on gave me a real pang of, blimey, that was 3 years ago that we planted this. It's still here, still doing its thing year on year. I think back to Larkin and the trees, and the idea of the recent buds relaxing and spreading, and yet their greenness is a kind of grief. The same as with the rosebuds, the same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. That use of personification for the flower smiling, being something that's present, but also not really. Is it smiling wanly because it knows it's going to die? Is it smiling because it's living in the moment? But tomorrow will be dying. Maybe not today. And tomorrow is when the sadness will come, but today you've got the nice thing, so enjoy the nice thing. When we look up the glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. We're in the strange phase of summer at the moment where officially we're kind of there. Feels like it on some days, other days really not at all. Today, I've gone out in my shorts and my dad fleece, which is pretty heavy duty, and can't quite tell if I got it right. It was raining a minute ago and now it's come out okay again, but there's a wind. This idea of the seasons changing and moving. I hope people enjoyed the re-release I did of Cut Grass. This deals massively with that idea of summer's pace, whatever that may be. That age is best, which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent, the worse and worst times still succeed the former. That's a tricky one, that. Not overly certain quite what that final part's trying to say. The enjambment drops down from worst times. The worst of times. I can't help but think of Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And I say this to you, if you're in a tricky place at the moment, if you're thinking about stuff and it's making you feel sad, and if you're maybe in a strange place when it comes to your own happiness, it will pass. In one way or another, it will pass. It's very hard to see when you're in it, but it will. And I think this, for me, is speaking to that idea of being spent. The worst and worst times still succeed the former. They'll carry on regardless. You're going to have sad times regardless of how successful you are, how young you are, how youthful and wonderful and fit and healthy and attractive you are. Life is still going to take a big old dump on you at some point with something. So don't wait for it. Don't stand around waiting for it to happen to you. When it does, you can do nothing for it. But you might as well enjoy the good times as well. If I've got that right, it does seem to then be backed up by this final stanza. Then be not coy, but use your time. And while you may go marry, having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. And that concept of prime is an interesting one, of what it means to be in your prime. Do you know you're in your prime until you're not anymore? Asking for a friend. I find it a comfort to think that hundreds of years ago, someone was feeling exactly the same kind of thing that I'm feeling right now. For different reasons, presumably. But nonetheless, a feeling of sadness, glumness, melancholy, but also a sense that they should be doing more to address this fact. They should be trying to make better use of their time. And what does that mean? Be not coy. Don't be coy about it. Don't sort of, pretend that you're doing something else. I think the phrase, "this is not the rehearsal," it's always springing to mind. One of the things over the past few weeks that's been a big bit of turbulence, besides everything else, is that I actually also applied for and got another job. Still in teaching, but I'll be plying my trade somewhere else. And it feels like an enormous relief to know I'll be moving along. It doesn't mean I'm not sad. But I had a moment the other day of thinking, this is not the rehearsal. That's really what came to mind when I saw the job advertised. I thought, well, why am I wasting my time in a place where I'm not happy and I don't feel particularly appreciated when I could be doing something else? But that requires boldness and it requires growth. And I don't think many people are good at that. I know I'm not. It's taken me a couple of years of therapy, really, to help me become able to champion myself and say, actually, no, I think I'm worth more than that. And life can really beat you down. But if someone told you, look, you're going to die next year, can't tell you when, just know that it'll be next year, I think you drop a lot of rubbish pretty quick and say, okay, I'm going to do this instead, because that makes me happy. The other stuff, no. And if I think back to the film, when Mr. Keating is speaking to those boys, it's a very powerful scene where he speaks about the concept of Carpe Diem. He says, because we're food for worms, lads. And I find it especially goosebump-inducing these days. It's been over 10 years now since we lost Robin Williams. What a great, is all I can say. I think as a fellow performer, that makes me sound like I'm in any way as talented. Not in the slightest. What an incredible talent, what an incredible bloke, and yet also how damaged and how ill he was. And I think of that movie, if you read the notes on it, he was going through a divorce at the time and was actually in a really bad place, both financially and mental health wise. And I think that some of those younger actors were really excited to be working with him and found him to be quite the miser in comparison to what they thought. But he also reportedly took a real interest in some of their careers and really helped them out further down the line. And in a way, the thing that's always been at the heart of my own teaching philosophy is this stuff isn't maths, or as Keating says, this stuff isn't American Bandstand. It's real. It's real stuff, and we're talking about reality with it. And when he shows them those pictures of the young men before the Second World War, and he says, here they are, full of hopes and dreams just like you. They were not thinking about the end, they were thinking about what they were going to do tomorrow, almost reminding them that there's no difference between us and the past. We are as one. I mean, if we're going to be brutally honest and take a realistic look at John Keating's teaching career within seemingly just the one school year, one sort of, maybe even 2 semesters, he manages to alienate the rest of the faculty with his avant-garde style of teaching, and a young lad under his sort of supervision takes a role in a Shakespeare play, which is then uber conservative dad takes real umbrage at, and the kid kills himself. I forgot how dark that whole bit was. And vandalizes an entire section of textbooks. I think, in a way, the lessons of it feel very, very pertinent and relevant to today. And in a way, that poem becomes the focal point for that first lesson. But he talks about other things too. I actually especially like the whole idea of, when he gets them to walk together, and he talks about conformity and about how important it is that you move and you think for yourself, and that the world will try to make you shape yourself to fit in with everybody. And it's interesting watching in 2025, because if anything, I feel like, just my humble opinion, I feel like non-conformity in any way now is genuinely quite a dangerous thing. It is viewed as quite a dangerous thing, because I feel like the world is more frightened, and especially if you think about conspiracy theorists during COVID saying, oh, well, I've done my own research actually, and I found out that it was 5G phone towers causing it, and you want to say, okay, well, you're clearly completely insane. But they are thinking for themselves. Not sure what with, but, this is the thing. The price of non-conformity really is that people look at you strange, and in some cases, rightly so. In other cases, maybe not so much. I think that education has become straitjacketed, and that's maybe the biggest problem with it, and maybe my biggest problem with it over the years is that it has, in my lifetime at least, always been entirely focused on grades. And as a teacher, I've always prided myself on the grades coming out the right way up most of the time. But if that's the sole measure of it, it leaves you in a very strange place, and I think it's entirely at odds with the message of the poem of Carpe Diem, seize the day. What are we teaching children? You should worry and you should be frightened of your grades and your prospects for the future. And in a way, that's what the film does so artfully. It's set in, I believe it's set in 1959, so just before sort of a lot of world events will cause a lot of upheaval in society. But also this sort of feeling of mistrust of someone like Keating. He's different. He both blends in and stands out. He was of the school, so he knows it well, but he was a rebel while he was at school. And in a way, I think it's where the film, as an educator, it's where the film unfortunately shows its age, not just as a film set in that time period, but also as a late 80s film, because it's about the idea of you must stand up for what you believe is right, or must stand on a desk for what you believe is right. We never know what happens to Keating. Does he ever work in a school again? Does he have to go and work at the local state school down the road and get things thrown at him when he tries to recite poetry? Who knows? It's a film, and films are films for a reason. But the message of it, I think, is profound, because especially now we look at things through that different lens of going, well, actually, all of us in this world, no matter what you do, no matter what your job, he even says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race.
And the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life?" Answer, that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?